my name's Callum from Bluehub, and today we're going to be taking a look at how you can get set up with the production bill of materials in Dia. If you haven't already, we do have another video on this channel called Which Bill of Materials is Right for Your Business. I would recommend going and watching that first, just to make sure that all the effort you're about to put in setting up these bills of materials is really right for what you need for your business. So before we get started and actually configure the bill of materials, there's a few steps you need to go through to actually make sure you can use the production module, because without doing these steps, the production bill of materials will not work. Okay, so first of all, you will actually need the production or the advanced manufacturing module subscription in Dia. If you haven't got that already, you can click your little face in the top right hand corner, select my subscription and go ahead and upgrade your package. If you're still a little bit stuck, feel free to get in touch or you can contact Dia's support. So first of all, we'll want to go ahead and set up some shop floors. Now what shop floors are they are locations of where you're going to be carrying out production. So they're actual physical locations where things happen. To do that, you'll want to go to Settings, Reference Books, Locations and Bins, create a location, and name your location. Okay. Once you've done that, you'll want to make sure you select Shop Floor from the drop-down list and select Save. You've now created your location of where production is actually going to take place. Once you've done that, we can go back to our list and we can do the second step, which is creating our logistics paths. Now you can create as many logistics paths as you want, but they're actually really fundamental to how Dia operates. Now, logistics paths are separated into three separate categories. We have components, shop floor, and demand. And it's as simple as components are where you're taking the stock from, shop floor is where you're carrying out production, and demand is where you're selling that product. So if you have a multi-warehouse setup and different things are happening in different places, and this is where you would tell Dia, this is our process. If everything all happens in one location, you can simply select the same location in every option, like so. Okay. In this example, I get my components from main warehouse, I produce them in main warehouse, but we sell from AWC. Okay, so it really just depends on how your locations are set up. To keep it simple, you may just want to go with the same throughout. Once you've done that, you can then click Save, and we can then go on to our next steps, which are creating resources and work centers. So what we can do for this is go ahead and select Production, Settings, and we can first start off actually by setting up our factory calendar, and you can select Setup Calendar like so. And this is just telling Dia what are your working hours. We can select Calendar Settings, and this is where we can say when our working week starts, when the weekend is, what the start and end times are, and when people have breaks. And now this is all just to take into account for your scheduling, and so Dia knows when to plan things. Once you're happy with that, you can select Apply Changes, and then you can also add any custom working hours such as overtime or any holidays such as bank holidays, New Year's Day, things like that where there'll be no work carried out. Once you're happy, select Save and we can go back. Next, we'll want to create our resources. Now, resources are people, tools, machines, whatever you want to interpret them as, but it's a resource that's going to be used as part of your operation. Commonly going to be a machine or a person. To create a resource, very simple. Just click this plus button here. We can then enter a code for our resource, so I'm just going to put MACH005. I'm going to name it machine. I can then say what type of resource it is. So is it a machine, is it labour, or is it other? So as you can see, those are the two common types. If it's labour, you can link it to a person within the system. If it's machine, then you don't. So we're just going to go with machine. We can then say whether it's operational or non-operational. We can apply tags to it. And then we can then add any further details such as, is it an infinite resource? So does it have any capacity? If it doesn't, then you can put infinite resource. If it does, you want to leave that in unticked. We can then select from the options down below in our locations, such as production facility, which we just created. We can say how many of these machines we have by clicking the 0. And we can say how many of these we have. So machine A, and we can go ahead and save. And we've now told the system, machine, we have one of these in production facility. And if you have multiple locations such as I do, you can say how many machines are in each location. Costs, this is where you can just add any costs or any planned downtimes against that resource. Attachments is where you can attach any documents to that resource. And used in also shows you any operations of where it is used. Okay. Once we're happy with that, we can go ahead and click save. It'll let us know if there's any issues. We just need to give it a unit of time for our costs. So we're going to say 1 hour, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. This costs the business £10. Okay. So for every 1 hour this is used, it will add £10 to our production cost. We also just need to apply an account, and it will need to be an expense account. Let me know if there's any other issues, and no, we're all good now. So we've created our resource. Next, we can go ahead back to settings, and we'll want to create our work centers. Now, work centers are sub-locations, locations within a location of where things are actually carried out. Okay, so if you imagine there's like a 3-tiered structure, you have our production facility, which we've just created as a shop floor. We then have work centers, which might be cutting area, machining area, quality control. And then below those, we have our actual work centers, which are machines. Okay. So it's really easy to create a work center. Just click the plus button here, type in a code, give this a name, and then finally we can say whether there are any consumption bins or output bins. Consumption bins are where we consume stock from. So we want to consume stock from production facility, and output bins are where things are put when they are finished. Okay. Once you've done that, we can go ahead and select save. And the final thing we need to do before we move on to the bills of materials itself is go to settings, general settings, and then production process customization. There's a few options here that are really going to impact how you use this module. So the first 3 options are how you want Dia to react to certain things. So stock transfer is automatic, manual. If at any point a stock transfer is needed throughout the process, for example, co-manufacturing, where you need to transfer goods to the co-manufacturer, or you have stock in one location but you need it in this location, this Dia will say whether you want it to do it automatically. So Dia will look at that and create the transfer order for you, or do you want to control it yourself and do it manually? Purchase order replenishment. This is the exact same process, automatic or manual. So when you release a production order, do you want Dia to create purchase orders for you for all your raw materials, or do you want to do it yourself by clicking manual? And finally, nested order production. If you have any nested orders or sub-level bills of materials, do you want Dia to create production orders for them, or do you want to do it manually? Next, this one's really important. There's 2 options here currently: when order is authorized or via smart reordering or MRP. So if you're a business that makes to order, so you receive an order, then you produce to that sale, you'll want to select when order is authorized. If you make to stock, you'll want to select via smart reordering / MRP. It's as simple as that, depending on your business model, what you select here. Waste write-off, including production cost, or post it to an expense account and select your expense account. If you're using co-manufacturing or subcontracting, do you use buy-sell of products or transfer? So some people will transfer raw materials to a co-manufacturer, some people will sell the raw materials, then buy the finished item. Depends on your process. When to transfer finished goods to storage location. So don't transfer, don't do anything when you finish a production order, on production order completion or on production run completion. So that works in tune with your output bins that we saw earlier and when you want that action to happen. Attributes are custom fields, any that you want against production orders. Product tracing gives you the option of whether you want a final check layer of batch and serial numbers, always traced, optional traced, or never traced. If you don't use batch or serial numbers, select never traced. If you do, then you may want optional or always. If you go with optional, it'll be an optional step to check all the batch numbers used in the production process before you complete. If it's always, it will make you check it. And finally, production documents, and this just details the way in which orders are displayed on documentation. Now that we've done everything there, we can go ahead and click save and we can move on to our production bills and materials and start to build one. Okay, so now that we are completed with doing all of our settings, we can now start to create our production bill of materials. Now, first off, before you do anything, you'll want to make sure all of your components are configured in Dia. You can do that by using the import functionality or by just adding all of the raw materials you require. Okay, so you want to make sure all of your raw materials are created before you do this step. To start, you'll want to click the plus button here and we'll want to create a new product. So we're just going to make some ice cream. Okay, we're going to call this ice cream 1 litre tub 2022. And we're then going to just configure the rest of our options. Okay, we're also going to want to make sure we select production bill of materials from the drop down. Okay, so once we've created our product and we've now selected production bills and materials, we first want to enter our quantity to produce. So out of all the items we're putting in our bill of materials, what is this based on? How many is it going to make? If you're just making one, then component quantity should reflect. If it's going to make more, then the same goes. So this bill of materials is going to be based on 500. If we created a production order for 250, it would half everything. If we created a production order for 1,000, it would double everything, and simple back and forth. We can then select component issue method, so you can use manual or backflush, depending on how you use or operate within your business. So we're going to go with manual. We'll then want to configure a couple of settings, so you've got an instruction URL, which is where you can just put a link or any information about this BOM. We can have a buffer percentage, which allows a buffer of time at the start and the end of our production. So we're going to go ahead and put 20%. We then have this option called ignore cumulative lead time. Now this is really important. If you select this, it will allow you to put a default production lead time. So you're telling the system that no matter what, this will take us 30 days, let's say, okay? If you untick this, Dia will calculate your capacity and schedule using your times that you put in your production bill of materials and also lead times to procure the right raw materials. Okay. Minimum quantity and maximum quantity for your production order. This actually only works if you're making to order. So if you're making to stock, you can leave these blank. Order quantity deviation, again, make to order only. And then run size dictates in what quantities you complete your batch, okay? So if I put 250 in here, although this BOM is based on 500, we can only actually create production runs for 250. And then finally, versions, which is where you can add, create, and manage your different versions of your bill of material. So back to the production BOM itself, we want to get started by selecting operation. Okay, this will create our first step. We can then say what type this step is. We're going to create setup. We're going to call it setup. This is going to take 2 hours. That's how long the cycle time is. And we're going to carry this out in the work center machine, the one we created earlier. Okay, so that's the configuration for our step. We can then proceed to add what lines are going to be using this setup operation. So for setup of the production process, we're just going to use a resource and we're just going to use column. Okay. And then we might add a note in here, for example, of clean machine. We want to say how many resources we're going to use per cycle, and that's that first step completed. Okay. We're then going to add a second step, and again, we can select from the type. So we have multiple types here. We have manufacturing, which is your standard, we're building something. Setup, time only, as you've just seen. Quality control, assessing something, time only, as you've just seen. And then co-manufacturing, which is if you're doing outsourced operations. We'll address that in a separate video. So we're now going to move into manufacturing. We're going to call this step blending. This step takes us 4 hours. And we're going to produce 500 units per cycle. Okay, so that's saying we're going to produce 500 units per 4 hours. If we were to put 250 in here, then the total time to make 500 would actually be 8 hours. Okay. We're also going to carry out this operation at work center machine. And then we're going to add the components that are used in the blending process. So we can select from our list, we can select our line type. We have component, which is a raw material, resource, which is a person or machine, as we've already seen, notes and attachments, where you can put free text or any documentation on your bill of materials. Finished product is a by or co-product of that process. So if by carrying this out, it produces something that can be stocked or sold aside from the finished good, that's where you would use a finished product. And then inputs and outputs, commonly used in co-manufacturing, but we can actually also use them in normal operations where, for example, if in step 2, it produces something that needs to be used in step 3. Step 2 would have an output of item A, and then step 3 would have an input of item A to say that we've made it in step 2, but we're going to input it into step 3. So we're just going to keep this nice and simple here. We're going to add a couple of components by adding more items and just adding a couple of components in here. Okay, and once we have our amount of components required, I'm also going to add in a resource. I'm going to add 2 resources. I'm going to add 1 for machine, which is what's going to carry out the blending, and I'm going to add Callum, who's going to be operating the blending machine. We're going to use 1 resource per 500 units, and we're also going to use 1 resource per 500 units. I'm then going to add in my products in here. So I'm going to use buttermilk. I'm going to use milk, sugar, glycerin powder, and some vanilla flavouring. Okay, I'm then going to say we're going to use 360 litres of buttermilk, 500 litres of milk, 20 kilograms of sugar, 30 kilograms of glycerin powder, and 15 litres of vanilla flavouring. I'm not an ice cream connoisseur, so those were all completely made up. And you can see the unit of each of those raw materials is displayed there, so you can say exactly how much you're using. Okay, so far we've created a 2-stage production bomb. Step 1 is to set up everything. Step 2 is to actually make the item. We're going to use some buttermilk, milk, sugar, glycerin powder, vanilla flavouring. We're going to do that at the machine, and Callum is going to operate that machine. Okay. At that point, we're actually done. We don't need to do anything else. I've told the system how we make some ice cream, and you can get more complicated or simplistic as you want to. You can have one step and that's absolutely fine. You don't need to do 2 steps like I've just done there. You can do 5 steps, that's up to you. My advice is keep it as simplistic as possible, because no matter how many steps you're going to make, someone's got to process them, and it's going to extend your time by each step that you create. Just to give you an example, I'm going to create one final step, and that's going to be type quality control. I'm just going to put QC. It takes 1 hour for 500 units, and we're going to carry this out at the machine location, and this is just going to be a resource of Callum inspecting that finished item. Okay? And what you can do on these quality control operations, you can put a finished product to say what they're actually inspecting. So I can say that I'm inspecting. It might not let me do it because I haven't saved it yet, but let's see. Oh, it does. Okay, and we're going to inspect 500 of those. We're going to use 1 resource per cycle. Okay, and there we have it. We're done. That's how to create a production bills of materials in Dia and set up the module. You can also see a couple of different things have happened, like cost per units and costs, and they're all taken from the cost prices of those items. And you can see we also have some resource costs as well, from which we configured earlier. So now that you've set up your production bills of materials, you're on your way to using the production module. The next step is learning how to use the production orders, and we'll have a separate video on those so you can really get down with how to process these. Hopefully this is useful. We've tried to use a generic example here and keep it quite simple. If people are interested in more complicated versions, let us know. If anyone's interested in a more simplistic version, we can make that simpler. So again, please let us know. Feel free to check out some of our other videos on this channel that will be directly applicable to this one. And thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.